Footballers get a lot of mixed press. Some see them as A-star athletes representing their countries and communities, while others see them as overpaid glory seekers who do nothing but kick a ball around on some grass. Whatever you think of them, it turns out that footballers aren't just good for sports, they're also good at pulling express trains. Not long after the grouping of the Big Four, the London North Eastern Railway found that many of their newly inherited locomotives were unable to keep up with the rapid increase in traffic. More passengers and the introduction of vacuum-braked carriages meant that express trains were getting too heavy to handle, and by 1926, the B12s, formerly the S69s of the Great Eastern Railway, that headed these services struggled to keep up. Naturally, more powerful locomotives were needed, but there was a problem. There were heavy weight restrictions on the lines connecting London to Cambridge and Ipswich to Norwich that the B12s primarily worked on, meaning the LNER couldn't just use another one of their heavier engines. As such, Nigel Gresley was tasked with designing something that was both strong and fast while remaining light on its feet. He went to Doncaster Works with some plans for a 460 locomotive and a 264 tank engine, the idea being to build something with the same 3-cylinder layout and motion as the D49s with an axle load of around 17 tons. Doncaster Works, however, was unable to produce anything satisfactory, and the 264 idea was dropped by 1927. Gresley instead went to the North British Locomotive Company, who drew inspiration from several of Gresley's other designs to create the desired engine. They took the cylinders, motion and cab design of the A1s and combined them with a boiler based on the kind used in the K3 and O2 class, producing two different designs. The issue was, one of the designs had an axle load of 18 tons while the others was 19 tons, both exceeding the desired 17-ton limit. The LNER eventually decided to compromise and built the version with the 18-ton axle load, which limited the engines to only being able to run on certain former Great Eastern Railway main lines as opposed to all of them. Before finalising the design, however, a few adjustments were made, including widening the cylinders by an extra ½ inch and making the firebox 5 inches longer. With the designs finalised, 10 were ordered from the North British Locomotive Company and were delivered by December 1928. The engines had three 17.5 by 26 inch cylinders, 6 foot 8 inch driving wheels, measured 62 foot 2 inches long, weighed around 80.5 tons, and used a mix of both Walschaerts and Gresley conjugated valve gear. In order to help distribute weight, the inside cylinder was moved forwards over the front bogie and powered the leading driving wheels, while the outside cylinders were connected to the middle set as standard. Given the classification of B17, despite the unconventional internals, the engines proved to be quite popular with footplate crews from the get-go, capable of handling the heavy expresses they were given. They weren't without their teething troubles, however. They were known to ride rough and frequently suffered from cracked frames, likely as a result of the longer frames and lighter springs the LNER requested during the final planning stages. Another batch of 12 were built in Darlington in 1930, these being built with boilers supplied by Armstrong Whitworth, lighter springs on their driving axle boxes and stiffer springs on their bogies. These changes resulted in them being categorized as a subclass, classified as B17-2s while the originals became the B17-1s. The new springs, however, didn't seem to solve the cracking frames problem, and later batches were once again given different spring designs along with a different lubrication mechanism and horn blocks on their middle driving axles, making them the B17-3s. The final batch built at Darlington and the 11 built by Robert Stephenson and Company were given larger tenders so that they could work further north, resulting in the classification of B17-4. By 1937, all of the original B17-1s had been refitted with new springs, so to make things easier, the 1s, 2s and 3s were all grouped together as the B17-1s, while the engines fitted with bigger tenders remained as the B17-4s. The first B17 to be built, 2800, was given the name Sandringham, with the next 47 members of the class being named after various country houses. This practice continued until 1936, when it was decided that the next 25 would be named after football clubs. Such names included Liverpool, Leeds United, Manchester City, Arsenal, and Doncaster Rovers, with the team's colours and a brass football positioned under the nameplate. This led to the B17s, initially known as the Sandringhams, earning the nickname of the footballers among railwaymen and enthusiasts, despite only a third of the class having football-related names. It wasn't just their names that made them popular, however. Engine crews were quite fond of them and considered them reliable performers, with the engines working as far as Leicester, Sheffield, Neasden, Manchester and Gorton. They were even often seen heading East Anglian boat trains. Not bad considering they were initially intended for former Great Eastern Rails only. Many enthusiasts also enjoyed the sight of them too. On lines outside of Great Eastern Territory, they often replaced plain, black, unnamed 440s, giving train spotters a much welcome change and splash of colour. Their colours weren't the only distinct thing about them, as in 1937, numbers 2859 Norwich City and 2870 Tottenham Hotspur were given streamlining in the style of the A4 Pacifics and renamed East Anglian and City of London respectively, giving them the classification of B17 5s. The streamlining was purely cosmetic and had little effect on their performance, with it finally being removed in 1951. Speed and a splash of colour, however, didn't make them flawless. Despite the frequent adjusting of the springs, the cracking frames were a constant source of trouble for every iteration of the B17s, and they remained rough riders. Not helping was their inability to tackle grades. While they seemingly worked wonders on the line between London and Cambridge, they often struggled around Ipswich and the more grade-intensive northern lines. By the end of the 1940s, all of them were moved back to Great Eastern Territory. By 1943, the B17s were starting to fall behind in terms of motive power, and so the slow process of upgrading them began. By 1957, only 6 remained unmodified, with 10 having been rebuilt into Thompson's B2s, while the rest had been fitted with more powerful A100 boilers. Even with an upgrade, however, these star players were past their prime. Withdrawals of the B17s began as early as 1952, with the rest of the class quickly vanishing between 1958 and 1960. Tragically, none of the 73 engines were preserved, but some of the football clubs that the engines were named after were presented with the respective locomotives' nameplates. The footballers may be gone, but they are certainly not forgotten. In 2008, plans were announced to build 2 new B17s, the first being named Spirit of Sandringham, while the other would be a non-functioning replica of 61662 Manchester United. Progress on both of these engines has been slow, and in 2020 the Manchester United project was cancelled, with all efforts now going towards Spirit of Sandringham. Just like most footballers, the B17s were a little awkward to maintain, but when it came to speed, power and being light on their feet, there were few LNER engines that could match them. Regardless of if you're a supporter of the B team, there's no denying they earn their place as a fan favourite. Whether or not we'll ever see the B17 Trust achieve their goal of getting a footballer back on the rails is still up in the air, but no doubt that if they do, it'll be a stunner. Subscribe for more.